Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I drove up the winding road, craving silence. The kind that wraps around you like a blanket. No phones, no noise, no pretending. The mountain lodge was supposed to be my sanctuary, the only piece of peace left to my name after years of working, saving, and giving away too much of myself. But as I reached the gate, something felt off. The driveway was lined with expensive cars I didn't recognize. Laughter floated from the veranda, loud, entitled laughter that didn't belong to my quiet retreat. I parked, heart pounding, and walked up the familiar stone path. My hand froze on the doorknob. I didn't even need to knock. My sister opened the door herself, dressed like a queen in a robe I bought her years ago. Behind her, her husband lounged on my couch, and her in-laws were sipping tea like they owned the place. She looked at me, stunned for a second, then smirked. "What do you want, parasite? You think you can just show up here? I'll call the police." For a moment, I felt the sting. Parasite. The same word she used when I couldn't help pay for Dad's treatment years ago, even though I worked 2 jobs. But something in me had changed since then. I wasn't the same quiet girl who let others trample her. I met her eyes and said quietly, "Go ahead, if you can." Then, I stepped past her and walked straight into the living room. Every head turned. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady. She sputtered, "You're trespassing." I smiled. "Really?" Because last I checked, this property deed still has my name on it. The silence that followed could have frozen fire. Her husband's face paled. Her mother-in-law set down her teacup with a clink. I opened my bag, pulled out the folder, the property documents, the utilities in my name, even the recorded video from the caretaker who'd been thrown out by them months ago. "You moved in here," I said evenly, "without permission. You changed locks, used my pantry, my linens, even the plates I bought with Mom. And you call me a parasite?" Her voice cracked. "I thought you were never coming back." "That's your problem," I said, finally standing tall. "You thought I'd stay small forever." Her husband stood up, trying to sound diplomatic. "Maybe we can settle," I turned to him. "You can settle the rent arrears for the months you've stayed here, and the damage costs, or I can let the sheriff settle it for you." The look on their faces, disbelief, panic, guilt, was almost poetic. For once, I wasn't the weak one. I wasn't the one begging for space in my own life. They left that evening, their car crawling down the mountain road as the sun sank behind the peaks. I watched from the porch, not out of cruelty, but closure. Inside, the house felt different. It wasn't empty, it was mine again. The scent of pine drifted through the open windows, and somewhere deep inside, peace settled where pain once lived. I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the fireplace, and whispered to myself, "Never again will I apologize for taking up space that's mine, because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't shouting. It's standing your ground so calmly that everyone else loses theirs." I remember that morning vividly, the mountain road curling like a silver ribbon through the mist, my breath fogging the windshield as I climbed higher toward solitude. I'd been running on empty for months. My job had drained me, the city noise had become unbearable, and my soul felt like it was begging for quiet. The lodge was supposed to be my reset button, the place where I could finally exhale. It had always been that way, a sanctuary left to me by my grandfather, tucked between pine forests and endless sky. The higher I drove, the more peace I expected to feel. But that peace shattered the moment I saw the smoke rising from the chimney. My chest tightened. No one was supposed to be there. I hadn't given anyone permission. Then, as I pulled into the driveway, my confusion turned to disbelief. There were luxury cars parked haphazardly, her husband's black SUV, a silver sedan with tinted windows, and another vehicle I didn't recognize. It didn't make sense. I stepped out slowly, the crunch of gravel under my boots echoing louder than it should. I half expected to see a caretaker, maybe some mistake, but instead laughter drifted from the veranda. That familiar grating laugh, my sister's. I froze. It had been months since we'd spoken. The last time we met, she'd thrown a few sharp words about me, living off family leftovers, and walked away. I'd tried to forgive, but some things cut deeper than silence. Now, there she was. Wearing a robe I'd once gifted her on her birthday, the one she'd called cheap at the time. Her husband was lounging on my couch, scrolling through his phone like he owned the place. And two older people, her in-laws, sat at my dining table, sipping tea, chatting as if this mountain lodge had been theirs for generations. For a long second, I couldn't move. It was surreal, like watching strangers play house in my memories. The walls, the furniture, the scent of cedar, all mine, all familiar, now turned into someone else's backdrop. My throat tightened. A strange calm spread through me, cold and heavy. My sister finally noticed me standing at the door. For a moment, surprise flickered across her face, but she recovered fast. Too fast. Her lips curled into that mocking smile I'd seen all my life, the one that always preceded cruelty. "Well, look who decided to crawl back," she said, crossing her arms. "What do you want, parasite? You think you can just show up here? I'll call the police." Her words hit like a slap. The same venom, the same tone, but this time something inside me didn't flinch. I wasn't the younger sister she could belittle anymore. I looked at her, at the arrogance on her face, at the people sitting in my house, and something inside me finally broke free. I smiled, but it wasn't the polite one she was used to. "Go ahead," I said softly, my voice steady. "If you can." And before she could react, I stepped forward, past her, and into the living room that was rightfully mine. The air inside the lodge felt different, thicker, charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I walked in slowly, my boots sinking into the carpet I'd chosen years ago, the same one she'd once mocked for being too plain. My eyes drifted over everything. The photos that used to hang neatly had been replaced with her family portraits. The shelves that once held my travel journals now lined with crystal figurines and tacky gold frames. Even the scent was wrong. The natural cedar and coffee aroma had been replaced with something artificial and cloying. Her husband looked up, startled, phone still in his hand. "You can't just walk in here," he said, standing, as if authority came with his tailored shirt. His tone was low but sharp, the kind men use when they're used to being obeyed. I didn't answer him. My gaze wandered to the kitchen, the countertops polished, my ceramic mugs missing, replaced with some gaudy tea set. Every corner screamed invasion, disrespect, entitlement. My sister followed me inside, her heels clacking angrily against the wooden floor. "You're trespassing," she spat. "This isn't your place anymore. You gave it up, remember?" I turned to her slowly, meeting her glare with quiet disbelief. "Gave it up?" I echoed. "When exactly did I say that?" She scoffed. "Oh, please, you haven't been here in over a year. You clearly didn't need it. We did. We've been maintaining it, taking care of it." "Taking care of it?" I cut in, my voice soft but sharp enough to slice through her lies. "You mean living in it, decorating it with your junk, throwing parties in it, pretending it's yours?" Her cheeks flushed crimson. "Watch your tone!" she hissed, glancing toward her in-laws, who now looked deeply uncomfortable. "You're embarrassing yourself." I almost laughed. The irony of her saying that, here in my house, was almost comical. "No," I said quietly. "I think for the first time, I'm not embarrassed at all." Her husband stepped closer, trying to play the mediator. "Look, maybe we can handle this calmly," he said, forcing a polite smile. "You can't just barge in and start accusing people. Let's talk like adults." I turned to him steady and cold. "Then start acting like one." Something flickered in his expression, a brief flash of guilt, maybe recognition that the ground beneath them was shifting. My sister, though, was still too proud to see it. She grabbed her phone, waving it like a weapon. "I'm calling the police," she said, voice trembling slightly now. "You'll regret this." I didn't move. I just looked at her, calm, unbothered. "Go ahead," I said again. "Call them. But make sure you tell them whose name is on the deed before they arrive." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see it then. The uncertainty creeping into her face, the realization that the threat she'd built her power on had no ground. She glanced toward her husband, searching for reassurance, but he looked away. Her hand dropped slowly, the phone heavy now, useless. I took another step forward, each one reclaiming something invisible, not just the space, but the strength she'd stolen piece by piece over the years. "You thought I'd stay quiet forever," I said softly. "You thought wrong." Her lips parted, but no words came out. The only sound left was the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet as I kept walking, deeper into the home that had always been mine, finally feeling like I belonged there again. I stood there in the center of the room, surrounded by faces that looked anywhere but at me. My sister's husband shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat as if trying to come up with something to say. Her mother-in-law clutched her cup, pretending to study the steam. Her father-in-law looked irritated, like this entire scene was beneath him. My sister, though, just stood frozen, eyes darting between me and the phone in her trembling hand. For the first time, she didn't look in control. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small leather folder, the same one I'd kept locked away for years. Property documents, receipts, bank statements, all perfectly organized. I placed it gently on the coffee table. The sound of it hitting the wood was louder than anyone expected. "This," I said quietly, "is the title deed. My name, my signature, my right. I never transferred it, never rented it out, never gave permission for anyone to live here. You all have been trespassing." Her husband leaned forward, frowning. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't," I interrupted calmly. "You can read it yourself if you like. Or better yet, you can call the notary who handled the sale. He's still alive." "He remembers me?" My sister's mouth fell open. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, finally looking her straight in the eye. "And I will—" She took a step toward me, anger flickering in her expression. "You always have to make a scene, don't you? You think this makes you powerful? You think you're better than everyone just because Grandpa left you something?" I almost smiled, but it wasn't amusement. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of being misunderstood and underestimated. "No," I said softly. "I don't think I'm better. I just finally realized I don't have to let people treat me like I'm less." Her in-laws exchanged glances. The room was tense, every breath thick with discomfort. My sister looked small now, shrinking under the weight of her own words. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out this time. I turned to her husband. "You've been staying here for months, right? Using the electricity, water, gas, all in my name. You've been hosting dinners, parties, and vacations. I've got the caretaker's reports, the receipts, even the neighbors' complaints. You owe me rent for every single day you stayed here." He started to protest, but I lifted a hand, stopping him cold. "You can either pay or I can involve the sheriff. Either way, this ends today." The old confidence in their faces drained away, replaced by unease. Her mother-in-law suddenly found something very interesting about the floor. Her father-in-law muttered something about not knowing any of this. And my sister, for once, looked utterly speechless. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something quieter, deeper. A steady peace, the kind that comes when you finally stand where you belong without apology. I walked toward the window, watching the afternoon sunlight stretch across the hills. The mountains looked the same as ever, ancient, calm, unbothered by the chaos of people. Behind me, I heard her whisper, "You planned this." I turned back to her, shaking my head. "No, I just stopped pretending I was powerless." That was the moment I saw it, the cracks forming in her world. The arrogance, the entitlement, the lies, all of it collapsing under the weight of truth. She looked around as if hoping someone would defend her, but no one did. And for the first time in my life, she was the one who had to watch me walk away. Not in defeat, but in quiet victory. I could feel the shift in the air as reality began to settle on them like a heavy blanket. My sister's husband sank back into the couch, silent now, his earlier arrogance evaporating. Her mother-in-law's lips were pressed into a thin line, and her father-in-law rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath about not getting involved in family disputes. My sister, though, still stood in the middle of the room, trying to gather the pieces of her pride. She forced a laugh, brittle and uneven. "You're overreacting," she said, voice cracking slightly. "We were just staying here temporarily. You're making it sound like we stole something." I took a deep breath, walking toward the table. My fingers brushed over the glossy surface, the same one I'd polished every summer when I came here alone to escape everything. "You didn't just stay here," I said quietly. "You threw parties, you replaced my things, you erased every trace of me. You didn't even ask. You took what wasn't yours and then called me a parasite for showing up." Her laugh faded. "We didn't mean any harm," she murmured weakly. "I just thought that I wouldn't come back." I finished for her. "That I'd stay small, stay quiet like always?" She flinched. And for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us stretched, thick with everything we never said. The years of competition, of bitterness disguised as jokes, of her need to always be the one on top. I remembered being younger, watching her get everything she asked for while I learned to make peace with scraps. I'd spent years trying to earn her kindness, but now, standing here, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I built this place, I said softly, but every word carried weight. Every inch of it came from my savings, my work, my sacrifices. And you turned it into your stage. Her husband stood suddenly defensive. All right, enough, he said. We didn't know it mattered this much to you. We'll leave, okay? Just calm down. I looked at him steadily. You should have thought of that before you moved into someone else's home. He looked away, jaw tight, and walked toward the hallway. Her in-laws followed, gathering their things with quiet shame. But my sister didn't move. She just stood there, shoulders shaking slightly, eyes glassy but proud. You think this makes you strong? She whispered. Kicking your own sister out? I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. No, strength isn't about kicking anyone out. It's about finally choosing myself, after a lifetime of letting you take everything. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, refusing to show weakness. She looked around the lodge one last time, her gaze lingering on the walls she'd claimed as her own, the space she'd filled with her presence. For the first time, she looked out of place there. When she finally walked past me, suitcase in hand, she paused by the door. You'll regret this, she muttered, but even she didn't sound convinced. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The sound of the door closing behind her was all the closure I'd waited for. I stood there for a while, listening to the echo of their departure fade down the mountain road. The silence that followed was different this time. Not heavy, not suffocating, but peaceful. It felt like the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. The sun dipped low behind the peaks, bathing the lodge in soft gold light. I sat down on the couch, the same couch that had once been buried under their clutter, and ran my hand across the fabric. It felt like reclaiming more than just space. It felt like reclaiming myself. For years, I'd carried the weight of being the quiet one, the accommodating one, the one who didn't fight back. But standing there, surrounded by everything that was mine, I realized I didn't owe anyone smallness anymore. I looked out through the wide glass window at the mountains beyond, strong, steady, and unmoved. They didn't ask for permission to stand tall. Neither would I. That night, the mountain air was colder than usual, crisp and biting as it swept through the open windows. I sat by the fireplace, the flames flickering against the old stone, casting shadows that danced across the room. For the first time in months, I wasn't surrounded by noise, by voices trying to control the narrative. Just silence, real, healing silence. I could finally hear my own thoughts again. The house was still messy, bearing traces of the life they'd lived here, perfume lingering in the hallway, a forgotten scarf draped over the chair, a cracked vase by the window. I didn't rush to clean it. Instead, I let it all sit there, like proof of what had happened, proof of what I'd taken back. I made myself a cup of tea, using the last of the leaves I'd stored before leaving months ago. The taste was faintly bitter but honest, the kind of taste that wakes you up. As I sat there staring into the fire, the events of the day played in my head like a slow reel. My sister's shocked expression, the look on her husband's face, the silence that followed my words. I should have felt anger, maybe guilt, but instead I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. It wasn't about revenge. It was never about winning. It was about ending a cycle, one where I kept shrinking so others could feel tall. My whole life, I'd been the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the one who said, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. But today I realized peace doesn't come from staying quiet. It comes from standing firm. I thought about my grandfather, the man who'd built this lodge with his bare hands, who'd believed in me when no one else did. I remembered how he used to say, "A mountain doesn't beg to be seen. It just stands, and those who notice, notice." I smiled at that. For years I'd been trying to be seen by people who chose not to. Now I didn't need to be noticed anymore. I just needed to stand. The logs crackled softly, the warmth wrapping around me like an embrace. Outside, the forest whispered with the sound of wind through the pines. I looked around the living room, the photos, the furniture, the worn-out rug, and realized it wasn't just my home that I'd reclaimed. It was my voice, my place in my own story. My phone buzzed once on the table, a message from my sister. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long moment before turning it off. Happiness, I thought, wasn't something she could give or take. It was something I had built back, piece by piece, in the quiet after the storm. I poured another cup of tea, leaned back, and let the night settle in. The fire burned low, steady, and alive. And as the first hints of dawn began to touch the mountains outside, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years. Light, unburdened, completely whole. The lodge was mine again. But more importantly, so was I. Morning came softly, with sunlight spilling across the floorboards and the sound of birds weaving through the crisp air. I stepped outside onto the porch, wrapping my hands around a warm mug, watching the mist lift from the valleys below. Everything looked untouched, calm, endless, free. For the first time, I felt like I matched that stillness. The mountain didn't demand attention. It didn't prove its worth to anyone. It just was, solid, enduring, and self-assured. That's what I wanted for myself now. No more chasing validation, no more fighting for space in someone else's shadow. I realized that taking back the lodge wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming myself, my boundaries, my dignity, my peace. My sister's betrayal had once hurt like a deep bruise, but now it just felt like a lesson. A sharp one, but necessary. Sometimes, people need to walk right over your line for you to remember it exists. As the sun rose higher, I felt something loosen in my chest. The anger, the guilt, the sadness, all of it drifted away with the morning mist. What remained was quiet strength, the kind that doesn't shout but simply stands. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills your lungs and your spirit, and whispered to the wind, "This time I choose me." And the mountains, steady and silent, seemed to whisper back, finally,